Welcome to the Navigating Solo podcast, a dedicated platform where we explore the unique needs and concerns of solo aging with a focus on empowerment, connection, and proactive planning. I'm your host, Aileen Gerhardt, and today I am thrilled to be diving into a fascinating and creative project that is raising awareness about solo aging in a truly unique way. The production is called Solo Acts, and it brings to life the stories of 18 culturally, economically, and racially diverse solo agers from Southeast Michigan and Western New York. Through this performance, we get a glimpse into the individual and collective experiences of this increasingly visible demographic. What's even more intriguing about Solo Acts is that it is the brainchild of an intergenerational creative team, a dynamic collaboration that brings together different perspectives, experiences, and insights. Joining me today are four members of this creative team: Decky Alexander, Sharon Cramer, Tyler Calhoun, and Hananiah Wiggins. Welcome to the podcast, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. We're so honored.
I am so excited to have you all on the show. To start off, I would love to hear what inspired you to create Solo Acts and also how the partnership with the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation and Generations United came about.
Well, thank you, Aileen. First of all, we really are so honored to be here. And it was really moving, that introduction. It was really a denouement of this amazing journey that we have. It begins actually in Buffalo, New York, actually. And we had, I say our company Limelight, had been doing a show that had been touring nationally on caregiving and vulnerable seniors called Vital. And we were asked by the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation to present to a series of faith leaders in Buffalo, New York in 2020, March. You know that time, you know that date. But before we got there, the organizer said, you know what? A lot of our faith leaders really want to know about elder orphans. That was their term. They're asking about it and they want to know, what can you do? And I'm like, so we have this pretty staid theater piece, but what we did is we went back to this big qualitative study that informed our work. And we did something called an elegy, it was an elegy to the theater piece that gave probably maybe 2 minutes at the most of illuminating the idea of what it meant to age alone, using this already given material that we had, because we didn't feel like we could recreate it. And the audience response, these faith leaders in Buffalo, New York, for this 2-minute little elegy was illuminating for us. We were like, oh. So that led us to something a little bit later, but I can have Tyler pick up there a little bit, but that is the impetus that gave us the idea that maybe there's a story here that needs to be told. And more importantly, voices that need to be made visible, and not just to faith communities, but to communities beyond. So that was the actual moment in time for all of us as performers and artists and educators that we were like, oh, wait a minute. And then the world shut down. Tyler?
Yes, and the world shut down.
Literally that day. Okay.
Yeah, it was wild. Before the performance and before the activities of the conference we were performing even happened, there was a speech from a local, I think they were a medical professor at a local university, and they were talking about COVID and the updates and what we knew at that time. And so that started before we had even gotten into any of the content of the day. So then by the time we got to this elegy piece, I feel like people were really hyper-focused on those people who were potentially could be alone or solo in this situation that we were all just thrust into. And so when we got back, we had decided that we needed to explore this in some kind of a way, but we also needed to be really safe about it because we were working with a vulnerable population. And so we did receive funding from Generations United to do some really cool projects. We created a podcast, which is available on pretty much anywhere you can listen to podcasts. I'm sure everywhere you can listen to this one, called Homebound, where we were able to interact with seniors who were stuck in their homes during the pandemic. And we talked about their lives, we talked about their homes, we talked about their communities, and we really dug dug deep into their thoughts around this time. And we did that from an intergenerational perspective. We had younger people engaging with these older adults, and we really found a lot there in the intergenerational relationships that we were cultivating through this project. And that fed into our next project, which was an intergenerational virtual storytelling group that we created called Regen. And so we were able to do that in a lot of different populations around Michigan. And that was made up of younger people who served as the facilitators. And we also had younger people and older people as the participants. And they were all connected either by their geographical location or by their identity. And from the elegy piece, we started to find ourselves in this intergenerational creational space. And that fed more into solo acts as we wanted to, obviously, from that experience in Buffalo, we were like, there's more to explore here. And Decky, I'll put the ball back over to you.
All right. And so basically we had cultivated this relationship with Ralph C. Wilson. They had been basically just contracting with us on this piece called Vital, a Fugue on Aging for their conferences and the respite initiatives that they had in Western New York and in Detroit. And then literally I just went to them and proposed this piece. And like, would you be willing to fund it from the research standpoint into inception? And we waited 5 to 6 months actually because they were in crisis, right? They were doing basic needs for the communities in Detroit and New York. And then they came back and they said the board approved it. We will fund it for you. We will fund this piece. Our coordinator, Emra Slichta at Ralph C. Wilson, had been at the piece in Western New York. And she recognized that this was a story that needed to be told. So they funded, it was like the first theater they like funded this, and they really invested in the idea on this kind of really community driven work. So that's how from our Generations United intersection into our Ralph C. Wilson, and that's how we came to be with Solo Acts.
So then you have a really good problem. You have funding and need to create a something, which is a great problem to have. Other people are seeking funding. Can you walk us through that creative process? You now have funding. You have great partnerships. You have interest in the community and anywhere that has seen previous iterations of this topic. So what does the creative process look like to bring it to Solo Acts version 1? I realize it's gone through other versions so that you were able to create this project.
Hey, so we were lucky enough to have the funding, like you said, and we had a mission, putting together the creative team that would help bring this to life. Decky and Tyler reached out to myself and some other folks who ended up acting on the project, as well as some people who were just helping to script it. And Abby Lawrence Jacobson, who has a PhD in gerontology, helped us develop a study and questions that we would go out and ask solo agers, either virtually through Zoom or in person with masks, because it was right at the height of the pandemic. Got together on a Zoom call and talked through the questions, figured out what were those questions really asking? Were they clear enough for somebody who wasn't thinking of it from a theatrical lens to be able to respond? Then the team went out and collected those interviews. For a lot of us, it was the first time we'd been in someone else's home in multiple months because of where we were in the pandemic. And I can safely report that we did not contract COVID or give COVID to anyone during normal fest, but it was just so mind-blowing to be welcomed into someone's space where we weren't sure what would happen if us breathing the same air would put them at some type of risk or ourselves at some type of risk. But we were really grateful for the participants that welcomed us in and for the participants that got on Zoom with us. And we know how much Zoom fatigue was happening at that work time.
Right.
Everything was virtual, especially for an older population who didn't live their entire lives. Technology. I think one of the surprises from me as someone who did some of the interviewing, I had one person in Buffalo, New York, who I did a Zoom interview with, and one person in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where I live, who I drove to their apartment and did the interview in person. And I think I just expected the in-person one to feel a lot more organic or natural, and that the Zoom one might feel a little stunted or distanced, I might say, because we were states apart. But that connection, that feeling of wanting to share a story was immediate in both, but definitely in the Zoom, is that they were starved for that connection. So that was an amazing process.
That's nice. That's another gift to give in the process of being able to share someone's story.
Absolutely. And due to the funding that we received, we were able to give a gift card to the participants to let them know that we cared about them, time. We were able to share that resource. Then after we collected the interviews, the team had the wonderful job of transcribing. So that was got to use the software service where we put the audio in and watched Otter AI generate the words, and then had to go in and correct the transcription because technology is technology. After that, we got together and looked at the different themes from the transcription.
I was very lucky that I happened to see in the newspaper a call for people to participate in the project because that was one of the vehicles that the creative team used to find people. But at the point that it ran in our paper, they had already maxed out with their number of people who were going to be part of the interview group, but they decided that I could serve in a different function as a member of the creative team. So I intersected the project at the time that we had the transcripts, and they were very long, detailed, complicated, and we were trying to figure out some important themes that we thought would be relevant to multiple interviews. Because as you mentioned in your introduction to us, these were people from all kinds of backgrounds. They really weren't identical, which was intentional. So what we did in terms of our theme exploration was look at things, and there were many themes, but I'll just mention one that we were talking about. We heard a lot of people talking about being concerned about how to remain independent, particularly at a time of a health crisis like we were experiencing with COVID. And we saw that we almost pictured a continuum of individuals in terms of their capabilities and independence. Some had major health issues that limited what they could do or escalated their concerns about themselves and each other. And others were able to be pretty self-sufficient and think about people who weren't nearby necessarily, but who were part of their lives. So that's an example of one of the themes that we thought about. Tyler, I think you were going to mention another one or two of the themes that we identified.
To go off of what Sharon was saying with that self-sufficiency and the continuum of it, health was a major theme that came across everyone's story. And we were clear about questions regarding health, but the way that people approached it and the way that health factored into their lives was very different. Something that really surprised me when people talked about health was the way that they would be creative in the way they had to navigate the system. For instance, one of the first questions that someone got asked when they showed up for surgery is, do you have someone there to take you home after the procedure? And they didn't. And so they pointed to someone random in the waiting room and said, oh yeah, sure, they're going to be there for me when I get out. And then after the procedure, they found their opportune moment, slipped out, called a cab, got home, and nobody called to follow up with them about it. They did what they had to do because that procedure was necessary. And it's a lighthearted story, and when we heard it and the way we tell it, but there's something real there. There's a real need there. And the way that those needs showed up in people's lives was very different based on where they live, based on what services are available in their areas, and how COVID showed up in their life too. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but COVID really just took a lot of existing problems and not only exacerbated them, but amplified them and heightened them in a way that made them completely new challenges and obstacles for people, whether that be getting to an AA meeting or figuring out how they're going to talk to their daughter or navigating Shipt for the first time and realizing there are no people to bring you groceries. Yeah, those are some of the common themes, but the way that people experienced them was so different.
And a real resilience and tenacity around, I need to solve this issue. What are my options? That piece of being signed out of a medical procedure is a historically common barrier, especially for solo agers, for anyone during the daytime when you need someone to come sign you out. So it's not unique to solo agers, but it is often a barrier. And we know what happens if someone isn't as savvy as that person in seat number 6 will sign me out, and the desk takes that. then they might choose to put off that procedure, which does not benefit a health outcome at all. The savviness and the resilience around that is very clever. Were there challenges that came up that you also, there's certainly thematic things, but are there specific challenges that people shared at all? Or would you fold those into the themes as well?
I think when we were thinking about the question or the idea of performance challenge, we were thinking about the entity as a whole. And I think for us, we were thinking about what is the role of like near and facilitating this kind of aware. And I think we built this initially with the idea of a kind of a specific audience, Aileen. And our audience were like, maybe it was faith leaders or policymakers or people who were in places of power. But one of the things that this performance very early on told us, and this is why we're probably on iteration 2.5, but this is why this became a kind of theater of affirmation. We have a theory of change, but the people that came to the work organically, the theater pieces, whether that be in New York or in Michigan, were solo agers. They came. And they wanted their experiences, as Tyler said, as maybe diverse and nuanced as they all might be, affirmed in the public space. And there's something powerful about seeing your own life, even in moments, affirmed and having other people see it. For us, I think the challenge, but it's really more of an opportunity because theater's dynamic, it's constant, it's change. And we realize, you know what? Our audience is broader than policymakers and healthcare workers and nonprofit leaders. So we had a theory of change that went from we want to affirm the experience of those who are aging alone. We want to challenge preconceived notions around those aging alone. We want to illuminate, shine a light, things that might be complex or complicated. And we want to advocate, whether we want to give tools for the solo agers to advocate for self, or we want other people to become advocates within their own spaces. So when we say the theater, not everything can be all things to all people, but we did try to create a piece that has multiple audiences. So I think that's the performance challenge, but it's also the opportunity to be able to do those things. And that's kind of where we ended up a little bit. I know Sharon's got a little bit ideas as well on kind of the addressing the challenges of how solo acts addresses challenges as well.
Well, I think too that when you think about it or hear the word theater, you think of going into a darkened room, watching something and leaving. And one of the things that was really different with this performance was each time there was a talk back afterwards, there was an opportunity for people to say, I see myself here or I don't see myself. And we were able to incorporate that into those comments into the evolution of the pieces as they emerged. So, for example, there's one amazing moment about somebody who keeps moving for various reasons. And she finally ends up and she says, and all I have left is that dresser and this chair. And I was sitting next to a person and she said out loud, she said, that's me. And the opportunity to have that's me experience was vocalized during these talkbacks. And in some cases we heard, I didn't see me. Where am I in this? And that led to some of the new parts that were incorporated since the play moved from year to year. So the first production, was that back in 2021, Decky?
No, 2022.
2022.
Yeah,
Or
right.
we
Like
had
June.
a number, well, the one in Ypsilanti first, right? So that one that was really the rough work beginning point, and I didn't even see that. And then I saw them after that. And then what Decky and the group were able to do was incorporate some of my writing, me as a solo ager, and my perspective on things. And we were able to pull those thoughts into the piece. So that was very exciting for me too. So it's been an evolving performance and experience.
That all sounds completely amazing. And it also sounds like you have a number of stakeholders in the audience. You have self-identified solos who are hoping to be seen and heard and affirmed, or feel like perhaps they're not and they would like that woven in. You have community professionals and members who are going to be advocates for solo agers. You might have policymakers, you have faith leaders, you have a whole continuum of folks in the audience. Were there other specific stories or feedback from different stakeholder groups when they also experienced whatever iteration of the piece?
I think we had children of solo agers, and they were able to speak to how they gained new insights to their parents' experiences. That was something we hadn't expected. And in fact, at one point, somebody asked the actors who were part of the production to speak about what they got out of it. And
Mhm.
I know that some of them did speak about new insights about, I think Tyler talked about her grandmother and her new insights about her grandmother as a result of the play.
Yeah, yeah. My grandma, she is actually, her situation has changed slightly since we performed this, but at the time she was living in Virginia, and the closest family that she had to her were in Florida. And so anytime there was something that would go, wrong, or there was a potential health scare or something, we were the closest people to be able to help her. But that's not very close. And her situation has changed a little bit. And now she lives in an assisted living community in Florida, closer to those relatives. So it's
Mhm.
amazing that they were able to help her make that transition and just make her life a bit more comfortable and easier and less worrisome. But I also realized that is not the case for everybody. And actually, after that performance, I remember being a part of a lot of conversations with my family and just talking about how we could better support her and figure out like what she wanted to, because she was, like a lot of the solo agers we talked to, really independent and wanted to make sure that she was retaining that sense of independence and that she was able to still do things on her own. So being able to find that compromise where she was still able to maintain her integrity, but also if there's something that she really needs, we can get there in a reasonable time. It's made a huge difference. It really has.
The
That's
whole
what makes
conversation speaks to the notion that there are listeners or viewers, depending on how they're tapping into this, who have a particular sense for them of where they are on that solo aging continuum. So for me, it's a framework. People ask me, what is the definition? There isn't a definition. We don't issue a membership card. It's not AARP or other membership. It's self identified. And the framework of I either am married, partnered, or not. I might have kids or not. I live alone or with a spouse or a partner. Or if I had children for a variety of reasons, geography. We don't live in multi-generational neighborhoods or households really in the same way anymore. That boots on the ground that Tyler was referring to all kinds of challenged family dynamics and all the other things that come with being human. And all of those different stories speak to that solo aging may have a certain number of letters, but that's where the containment ends, that it's where I see myself on this continuum. And also, even if I don't identify as a solo ager, what can I glean from these experiences? Because it touches on pieces of aging. We're aging from the minute we arrive on the planet. I don't think we like to think about that till we're in our 40s and 50s. But so it really speaks to that continuum. I just wanted to highlight that as well, because sometimes people will experience a solo aging something, a talk, a workshop, a piece, and say, well, they're defining solo aging this way. So I just wanted to throw that in. So thanks for being game for that as well.
Aileen,
So,
if I may, another audience that I think kind of
uh-huh.
that came to see the show that maybe didn't expect to take away so much from it, not just the children of solo agers, but people just in our community who
Mhm.
care about theater, right? We who live in Ypsilanti or these parts of Michigan or upper New York, have people who were just curious about theater, who wanted to come see a show, but didn't expect to see an investment of themselves in the show. They walked away, they said, I'm not a solo ager. My parents aren't solo agers, but I'm a part of this community and I know there are solo agers in this community. I want to know what I can do to help and connect to the solo agers in this community. Where can I help? How can I help? What part of myself can I bring to this work? So that was another thing where we kind of had to say, okay, so we have people who are not solo agents, who are not leading nonprofits, who are not policymakers, but are part of this community and help solo agers. Where are they in the show? Where are they in this?
We had a wonderful experience. I don't think it totally materialized the way we hoped, but the president of Decky's University of Eastern Michigan University came to the show, and he participated in the talkback session that Hananiah and I were in. And in conversation, he realized that there was a way that possibly there could be a connection for the YMCA group and his campus. Because he said, for example, every semester, there are all these solo performances that theater students and music students have to give, and they're very woefully underattended. Maybe there's 10 people in the audience. He said, wouldn't it be great if we could get solo agers to be there, not only to attend, but to communicate with each other before and after? So it could be really a transformative experience. And the people from the Y said, wow, we have buses, we could use those. And it was such a high. The idea of it was so unique and so exciting. So that's a whole different audience too.
I think really quickly to add on to that is that if you we call this like generative theater, like it generates something, right? I think one of the questions you asked is why theater? And, if you create a space where, to your point, anybody can enter and whether they participate and see themselves at any level, then ultimately it can do something. We want it to do something, whether that something is 10 years from now or 3 years from now, or they went home, they called their grandmother across the country and they were like, oh my, you have a neighbor that might be able to pick you up and take you to the doctor, whatever that is. And if theater can catalyze that in the immediate or something, then it's done our job. And yes, we have some things we wanted to do. We wanted to make something that in some people that were less visible, period. It's really this. And yes, we got a lot of feedback. I think we talked a little about when being asked about what are some other things that we heard from audience. But one of the things that really led to our changes in the latest and pretty much stayed iteration is that when we were in New York, we heard from individuals in our talkback saying, I don't see myself. And partly the seeing themselves was seeing how to navigate the unknown. The immediate unknown, Eileen. And this was it. Like, so somebody was newly soloed, had been a partner for the whole life, and they had not a tool, a way in their toolbox to figure out how to do that. How do I go to a restaurant and be part of a world where everyone is a duet? And now I'm a solo. How do I do that? What do I do? How do I make it? And that even just question, and I'm not sure, maybe I've added like how artful I thought that question was if it's not included it. That might have been like a one-sentence question, but it generated a thing like, what does it mean for somebody who hasn't been part of something? Because this whole piece is about transition. That's really what it is, right? Different transitions. And what does it mean to figure out how to give somebody a way into transition into a world that is unfamiliar? And I think we tried to answer that theatrically and crafted a piece based upon that question, which has received a lot of really, I think, strong response since we've done that.
Well, first of all, it's a different medium for exploring the topic, which in and of itself, to me, is genius. I may be biased. I've been a cheerleader of the production since I found out about it, but I think there's also another way for people to access, see themselves, all of that, often in question and answer sessions. As part of my community education talks, people ask, why didn't anyone teach us any of this? Now, I am sure that Decky and other higher ed administrators and teachers and professors do a great job in engaging students. But our 20-year-old selves don't necessarily want to plug into what our 50, 60, and 70-year-old selves might be doing. And unfortunately, there's between then and when we ask the question in our 50s, 60s, and 70s, if I'm lucky, there'll be a theater performance I can land on. But if I'm not, there's no manual that says, hello and welcome to aging. This is how you figure out transitions. This is how you figure out these pieces. And so every tool that people have access to that's within their own comfort zone is really a fabulous thing because people then can take on what they find beneficial and pull different parts and glean different things. So for each of you, you've taken a deep dive in different ways into the world of solo aging, either living it and or being a part of a creative team or being a part of this creative team. Has your sense about solo aging and your understanding of it changed from when you first started? And then also, and you've spoken to this a little bit, and also what else you hope viewers may take away from the performance when they are fortunate enough to experience it, which I hope more and more people are able to do.
Kyrie,
So,
take it.
very funny story of the other day. I'm planning to go to a concert at our Pink Martini at our Philharmonic Orchestra. And nearby is a restaurant that I've gone to by myself in the past before the performance. So I called and I left a message asking for a dinner reservation for that night. And when I called back, the woman said, "Oh, I'm just getting to reservations for that night in October. Is this Sharon? You're looking for a reservation for one?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "How many people will that be?" And I said, "One." And then she said, "Oh, I'll give that to you." And I thought, wow, she's like doing me a favor. And
She also didn't participate in active listening to begin with, but okay.
well, I'm sure that her habits are always to say, is it
How
just
many?
four? And sometimes it changes. But it's just a heightened sensitization, I think, to the realities of life as a solo. It's been a really great opportunity to rethink my presumptions about my life and the life of my friends who are solos. And we're all different and we're all the same. And it's been really enlightening for me to work with everybody on this project.
I think, Sharon, you hit the nail on the head for me when you said rethinking presumption. When we started this project, I think a few of us were really approaching this from a deficit mindset. But then we came away from these interviews with what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, that sense of resilience, that sense of fierce independence, that strength. And that's not deficit, that's not weak. You have to be strong to be able to do those things and do all these things for yourself. So it really just being engaged in this project and working with Sharon and learning all these different stories and deeply going over these stories for hours, fixing the transfer. It did gave me a whole new appreciation for solo agers and being a single person, 30 years old, living in the city. Going back to my work in solo acts, I just think more and more how this world is not set up to be solo. You know what I mean? And I think the people in our stories, like, and their lives, they have made such a beautiful fabric of community around them and relationships to get things done and to make things happen and to make life work for them. And those relationships and those family that you build, whether they're blood or not, should never be discredited. They are so valuable and integral as you get older and as you step into young old age, middle old age, and the oldest old age.
I remember using the word stereotypes a lot at the beginning of our conversations together because it seemed like that was really the battle that we had to fight against stereotypes. While you were talking, Tyler, I got the perfect metaphor for what you're saying. Curb cuts. Remember in the old days when they didn't have curb cuts for people because they said, well, those are just for people with wheelchairs. How many of them are they? And now realize people with strollers, people with walkers, people with grocery carts, everybody can use curb cuts. And now they're the norm. And now they're even the law. And I think that someday we'll have curb cuts for solos that I won't have to say just one. I won't have
One is a complete sentence, and you don't need to add the just.
So
Well,
beautiful.
Right?
we have a local restaurant I visited as part of Urban Farm Day, and they have a table which is set up for solos to be together with other solos.
Wow.
So big 6-person table that they can come to. And there's also private tables if they want to eat by themselves. But the notion of the community table, and it was really cool to see that.
That's great.
I think for me, the big takeaway, I think similar to what Tyler shared, was the demything of solo aging. There are so many stereotypes that I think we associate with aging or being older. It's scary, it's near death. For a lot of my timeline or my life, it's been, if you're old, you're alone, no one checking in on you, or you need someone to help care for you. Your life is ending rather than ticking off and beginning in new and interesting ways. And getting to participate in the interviews and then transcribing, writing the pieces, Tyler, then Sharon, and getting to act in it and meet people through the shows and the talkbacks. Life is scary, but aging is an adventure. It's only as scary
Yeah.
as we allow it to be.
Wow.
I'm reminded of a little Margaret Wheatley poem where it says, "You don't fear people whose stories you know." And for so long, we didn't take the time to go explore the stories of the aging, what it means to live alone in that older life. I think for me, it was get older, go to college, go to grad school, get a job, get married. And you're adding these boxes as if your life isn't worthy or doesn't have meaning or isn't where it should be unless you checked those things off.
Yeah.
Being in my 30s and not married is less scary. And part of that is thanks to solo acts. And I think it's increased my empathy when it comes to talking to people who do things alone, talk to my dad, and you share us different things that scare him or things that are going on in his life. I think I'm able to listen better, to listen deeper. And I actually got to share the performance that we did at the library, and that changed so many of our conversations because now he's thinking of his life in new ways and less afraid to reach out to me and my siblings for help on certain things that he didn't need to previously. I think one word to say what this project is for me, it's life-changing.
First of all, everyone was so eloquent. And I think that we've had an evolution. And I think for me, I was pretty much a solo act for a really long time. I got married late. I was an I. It took a long time to get used to being part of a we. So I'm kind of coming back to more of a comfort place. But I really want to reiterate, I think what Tyler said is that I'm not sure our culture, society writ large, is made up for the solo life. And whether it's curbs or a reservation system or certain public policy on healthcare, but even just anything at all, even when you hear somebody sponsor something like an event, it's a duo. There's a real want in our world to say that we live in a world of duos, and that the connotation culturally is less than. And I think this piece was just an affirmation for me personally in this work of the value of and the joy and the possibilities and the struggles of living a life on your own. And so for me, I think it was more affirmational, and I felt even more of a need. Now, I do feel like for me personally, who's like also involved in an institution, an office that wants to solve things, like so my other day job is like, what are the processes and the policies in a community or a city that can help? What does the infrastructure look like? What does the public policy look like to provide for solo support? So I think for me, there's a policy one and there's an infrastructure one that I want to do as a result of this. So yes, I wanted to do this, but I want to solve something, right? As well, I want to foster awareness, but I want to figure out how to solve something and think that there are things that could and should be solved at the really hyper local level.
Solutions often come from the ground up. Sometimes if we wait for them to come from the top, we know the Godot will show up sooner than that. Use a theater reference.
Good one.
And we also know, and overall, we haven't really caught up to this, that a quarter of the baby boomers did not have children. And we have a caregiving shortage. I like to say when you put that in a blender, we're in trouble. That is not a good smoothie. If we are not approaching this from intentionality of support systems across the board, however someone self-identifies, we're missing the boat for sure. And ways to prompt conversation and give people the opportunity to see themselves or maybe not see themselves and share why they didn't see themselves and could you possibly think about it from this perspective, that kind of thing, I think is also important. I also imagine, as you were describing the transcribing of these interviews, of the amount of time it takes to coexist with those and the notion of, ironically, living with those people and their stories. And in a creative process, what that could mean, especially when it comes to a production about solo aging, I think is fascinating. I can look at solo aging from 10,000 different sides if someone lets me. I really appreciate the time. I am a huge fan of the production, of the team, of the conversations, and I'm incredibly grateful that the four of you have chosen to spend time today sharing the story, your experiences from all different locations, which is also fabulous. We covered a lot, and I'm sure we could have hours more of conversation. Is there anything before we wrap up that you feel like you wanted to share?
Anytime we get together to have, one of the things that happened when we rehearsed our podcast last night is it was like so joyous for us to be together, that the uniqueness of this intergenerational being to co-create is a message in and of itself. And so we're grateful just to be able to have this time and space to share this journey with you. And your work and your wisdom. And so I think that's more, I'll say that it's more of a thank you for the opportunity to bring us together because you love it. And we've been inspired by you. A lot of this work very early on was affirmed by your own work and your own framing. And I think we're grateful to be part of your ecosystem as well.
Well, life is about teamwork, no matter how we intentionally build our teams. So that is fantastic. For anyone who would like more information about Limelight, the easiest way to do that is to visit limelightlive.org. There are profiles on every one of the creative team members, including the four we were lucky enough to speak with today. Future presentations, future shows, requests to bring it to your neck of the woods, which I'm still determined to do in my neck of the woods, and all of that. And I will include all of that in the show notes as well. But limelightlive.org is the go-to point for all things for this. And I greatly appreciate the four of you spending the time today. And I also really appreciate people choosing to listen or to watch today's episode. So thank you for tuning in to the Navigating Solo podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review on your favorite podcast platform. And as always, if you have any suggestions or have topics you'd like to see covered or individuals you'd like to see interviewed, please send an email to podcast@navigatingsolo.com. So until next time, stay empowered and stay connected. I'm your host, Aileen Gerhardt, and this is the Navigating Solo podcast.